This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed. The weekly wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Kate Watson.
And I'm Claire Kimball.
Right off the top, Claire, you're in your happy place with a regroup on some notable elections. I'm right there with you, I must say.
Excellent.
I'm super into Greenland at the moment. There's some mopping up to do after tropical cyclone Alfred, literally and figuratively.
Yes, and then there was a lot of tariff and recession talk this week. We're going to explain that.
We will in what's coming up. Gout is back, St Pat's Day, the Grand Prix and Snow White. Before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by HubSpot. With HubSpot, marketing has never been easier. Create content fast, get better leads, and nail your reporting all in one place. Visit HubSpot.com/marketers to see how companies like yours are generating 110% more leads in just 12 months. Off the top, Claire, as promised, we're going to regroup on some elections that happened throughout the week. They're very different, but we're grouping them together.
Well, just
because they're elections.
Yeah.
One in WA and one in Greenland. Both don't normally get a lot of attention until now.
So we'll start locally with Western Australia. The Premier there is Roger Cook. He and Labor retook government. There's a third term of a Labor government there in Western Australia. That wasn't a surprise, but Labor did see a big fall in its primary vote. There were quite a few people voting in their number one spot for the independents and for the minor parties, but quite a bit of support for the Liberal and National parties as well.
There was an 11% swing to the Liberals and Nationals, but as we talked about last week, they were starting from a very, very low base. So all in all, not the big swing that they were hoping for. You might have heard in the news a bit about City of Perth Lord Mayor and media personality Basil Zemplis. He won a seat for the Libs just.
Yeah.
So some talk of him possibly taking leadership of the Libs over there at some point, maybe, perhaps.
They call him a personality.
Do they?
Because he's from Perth.
I
and
thought
he's
that
a
was,
personality.
I haven't actually heard that.
A personality. Yeah. If you're a personality in Perth, you're definitely a personality.
According to locals or according to people?
According to locals.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. But a lot of focus on him because, of course, he does have quite a bit of a presence. He's tied up with football and, as you said, with local politics there with the city council. So counting's ongoing. There's still a bit to go. Definitely, as Anthony Green said on the night, a devastating result there for the Liberals particularly. They couldn't translate that swing into real seats. So away they go again. Labor in WA.
Greenland, I think, is perhaps more interesting. Just a little bit more interesting if you're looking at like a sort of a macro global conversation. I did a bit of listening on this week. A Squizzer sent us a good recommendation, so thank you to the person who did that. The Daily did an episode, which I don't know, did you listen to that episode? The Daily did. I thought you must have.
Yeah.
We also had a shortcut out on it as well, and we got some really good feedback on that, so we know you're interested. All in all, Claire, what I learned is that Greenlanders mostly just want to be independent.
Seems to be that they do just want to be independent of Denmark because they're an autonomous territory there and not necessarily that keen on the USA buying them. Donald Trump, not that long after he became president, said that he wanted to buy Greenland.
Yeah, that's because of its strategic placement between North America and Europe, and also because it has some opportunities when it comes to critical minerals. I'll admit it's something I'm still trying to wrap my head around, and we're actually going to talk about critical minerals later in the podcast, so we'll get you across that a little bit later.
Isn't that a tease?
Well, what actually happened was that Greenland didn't elect anyone to a majority. The party that received the most votes, the Democratic, is about taking Greenland to independence in a phased way with a focus on investment in business. They received 29% of the vote. The runner-up on 25% or thereabouts also wants independence, but quite quickly.
Yeah, and so far as how they're going to form a government, they need a coalition, the Democratic Party. All reports suggest that they're likely to do that with the party that got third in that runoff, about 21%. More left-leaning, that party, supportive of that sort of go-slow independence approach as well.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that despite the long history with Denmark, and the money that Denmark gives to Greenland. They're really on the nose as far as the public goes. But at the same time, as you said, no one is interested in America taking control. Greenlanders just want to be Greenlanders. The biggest story of the week, though, here in Australia was the fallout from Tropical Cyclone Alfred, of course. We look at Google Trends data to help us inform about what people are searching for and what's going on. We say that all the time. The terms disaster relief payment and Energex outage map were big this week.
Very big this week because while the devastation caused by ex-tropical cyclone Alfred wasn't as big as they expected, thousands experienced wind damage, flooding, issues with stormwater. If you're on the coast, issues there as well. Properties and businesses damaged. On Thursday, the Insurance Council said that they'd received 45,000 claims.
Yeah, and then there's those who haven't experienced damage but are without power and can claim for things like food spoilage, for example. So to the point about Energex, it's the state-owned power company in Queensland. At the worst point, there were 450,000 homes and businesses without power.
Yeah, and on Friday, as we're recording, still about 40,000 without power there. They're mainly around the Gold Coast area, along that strip, as well as into the hinterland and that scenic rim. The issue there is that the damage to the infrastructure, the power infrastructure, was so severe that the work is more like a replacement rather than a repair.
Yeah, we have been getting first-hand reports from Christy from our Squiz Kids team. She lives on the Gold Coast. She sent photos of trees down on her apartment building. It was quite a lot to take in across the week, and a shout out to you if that's you as well. We know so many people listening will be much closer to this than we are. The race now is to get ready for school holidays and the Easter break. Of course, this part of the world is huge when it comes to tourism.
Yeah, and not just the Goldie. Some of Australia's most iconic beaches and beach towns are along the area that has had some severely eroded coastline. Millions of cubic metres of sand have been stripped from beaches from the Sunshine Coast right down to Coffs Harbour in New South Wales. Some of those pictures are really remarkable. We'll put a link into the episode notes on that.
Oh, you beat me to that. I was going to say we've got a couple of really good galleries. 6 metre high escarpments in some areas. It's not just these big slices out of the beach. Many have lost their width.
Just to explain that a bit, you can imagine with these really rough conditions, all of this sand has been taken from beaches, like the waves came crashing in, no matter how big your strip of beach is, and dragged it out. So you can just wait for nature to take care of that. Eventually that sand will be delivered back to the coast. But when you've got a deadline like the Easter holidays, in about a month's time, some councils are already dredging that sand, and they use very, very expensive specialised equipment to push it back to shore.
Yeah. Do you want some facts on coastal activity?
I'd love that.
And holidays? Australians make 31 million day trips to the beach each year. They spend more than $3 billion doing it. For international visitors, 70% engage in coastal activities during their stay. So that's, I assume, everything from swimming, a walk on the beach, heading to a restaurant with water views, surfing, boating, sailing, like all the good fun stuff. So whatever it is that they're doing, you can see how the beach is super important economically, particularly for this part of the world.
$3 billion on just going to the beach for the day. It's a lot of icy bowls. And maybe cabanas.
Move on. Talk about rainfall.
Yeah, well, look, just to note, as for where all of that water goes from the north, it's not going to help farmers in South Australia and Western New South Wales, also Victoria, who are in a drought.
Yeah, there's been some reports this week about that. Sadly, experts have ruled out the idea that the Murray-Darling Basin will ultimately deliver that water to those areas.
So I was reading a bit about this. I think I knew that there were areas experiencing very dry conditions. You and I both have friends in farming that are living in the country doing that sort of thing, and I knew that they definitely had a really dry patch, but I didn't quite clock that it was really that dire in that much area.
When we looked into it, some of the media are calling it a forgotten drought, and there's not a lot of hope that there's relief on the horizon. The BOM, the Bureau of Meteorology's long-range forecast, is showing typical April, May and June rainfall.
And look, the BOM gets a fair bit of flack from farmers about its long-range forecasting, but I assume that many of those affected would be really happy with typical rainfall, just as long as it rains.
A message now from HubSpot. When all your marketing team does is put out fires, you burn out fast. But with Breeze, HubSpot's suite of AI tools, you can get results without the stress. It means you can capture audience attention, access all your data from one place, and see how easy it is to get 110% more leads in just 12 months. Visit hubspot.com/marketers to learn more. 3 other stories this week for us to get you across. 2 are related to the goings-on at the top of the US government. We're starting with tariffs.
Exactly right. And a nice lead into that, we didn't say we've got 2 stories about President Trump because people might switch off. So let's do it that way. Lots and lots of column inches and airtime, maybe pixels if you're looking at online news, dedicated to tariffs this week. The hope was that Australia would be exempted from the flurry of tariffs that Trump is introducing on a range of products from a range of countries. But that's a no.
That's a no. So to be specific, this is about 25% tariffs, taxes on steel and aluminium exports to the US that are worth a collective $1 billion. It's one of those stories, Claire, where it's really easy to get lost in jargon and numbers. So I think it's useful to take a step back. What will happen is the cost of Aussie steel and aluminium will essentially be 25% more expensive for American buyers. The theory is they will buy local, which will boost American industry. Yep. It is a bit of a mind warp.
Yeah, it's the sort of trail of consequences when you do something like this. So this is all about Trump's America First approach. If you're thinking, but don't we have a free trade agreement with the United States? I'm sure that's happening right around Australia this morning as you're listening to this. We do have a free trade agreement with the United States, but our ambassador Kevin Rudd says that it's just this new world order in this second Trump administration.
Yeah, we both watched him interviewed by Sarah Ferguson on 7:30 on Thursday night. He said this administration is more nationalist on questions of foreign policy, more protectionist on trade policy, and much more transactional in its overall approach to international negotiations. He also reminded us all that there's no exemptions for anyone.
No exemptions for anyone. You mentioned that our steel and aluminium exports to the United States are worth $1 billion. Our lamb and beef exports are worth $5 billion. So there's bigger fish to fry, so to speak.
Yeah, the point being Trump's actually flagged agricultural tariffs are on his radar, something to keep an eye on. I think 2nd of April is the day that those may come into effect, not long. As we got through the week, lots of talk about whether we should retaliate with tariffs on American imports. Anthony Albanese says we won't be doing that. Some other nations are, though.
Yeah, so for example, the EU, they're saying that they'll place a tariff on American whiskey imports. That's a consequence of their aluminium and steel tariffs. Trump has responded saying if they do that, he'll put a 200% tax on champagne and wine.
In capital letters.
Yes.
He posted that. That's important.
And some exclamation marks.
There was.
Yep.
There's been some who say that we should send a message to Trump by doing the same, by retaliating. But so far, Albanese says he won't be, as I said, he won't be doing that. The best thing he reckons Australians can do to help combat the impact is to buy local. I think his example was choose Bundy over an American rum.
Yeah. Before we move on, one thing that caught my eye this week, it came up with Foreign Minister Penny Wong. She said the government has been in talks with the Trump administration to give the US special access to Australia's critical minerals.
We promised we would get here.
We'll come back around
Here
to
we
it.
are. So
Yeah.
in the discussions to have Australia exempted from those tariffs, our officials proposed a guaranteed supply chain of processed minerals and investment funds for new critical minerals projects. Access to those critical minerals are something Trump wants. This is not the only context that they've been talked about.
No, it's not, because we were talking about this just a couple of weeks ago. There's been this campaign from the Trump administration to get Ukraine to sign over access to its critical mineral resources. And just to pause on that as we explain critical minerals a little bit, we went to the Geoscience Australia website. It's got a really good page of information on this if you want to dive into it.
Really good, simple explanation. We will help you. So what's being talked about when people refer to critical minerals is metallic or non-metallic elements. At a top line, they're essential for the functioning of our modern technologies, economies, and national security.
Yeah, pretty important stuff. You can go to that website page and see exactly what those elements are. You need them to make things like mobile phones or computers or fibre optic cables or semiconductors, those sorts of things.
And there's a risk that their processing can be dominated by countries or companies that could limit availability. That's why Trump is looking to shore up a supply chain, and he's using it as a bargaining chip in negotiations. In this instance, it didn't work. We still had those tariffs imposed on us, but it is something that is in discussion, I guess. It hasn't just come up for us in tariff negotiations. There's been years of talks with the US about developing supply chains for these critical minerals, for military, for energy, for high-tech industries outside of China's control.
It hasn't come out of the blue. Remember the Future Made in Australia policy, which is one of those sort of, I think for most people, certainly for me, a bit of a sort of vacuum of space of we're spending a lot of money on a policy. A lot of it's about these critical minerals and a lot of it is about how we do sort of shore up our strategic alliances, and with the United States is a big one. It is a really big and it's going to be a big developing theme. So we just wanted to put that on your radar.
Lucky you. Sticking with Trump, but moving on to the US economy, Wall Street had its worst day of 2025 on Monday. The major S&P 500 index fell 2.7%. Couldn't tell you what that means.
The S&P 500 index essentially is a collection of the biggest 500 listed companies in the United States.
Thank you.
S&P stands for Standard & Poor. It's essentially just one of those companies that does this indexing. So you chuck them all together and you get a bit of a snapshot about exactly what's happening in markets. So you're right, fell 2.7%, a really big fall for one day. That happened after President Trump refused to rule out that his tariffs could cause a recession.
We've said it before. We'll say it again. Markets like certainty, and the way these tariffs are rolling out are a bit here, there and everywhere. It's been a wild week. Markets don't like that. Back to the recession bit. The question is why Trump would do these tariffs if it would damage the US economy.
Yeah, so this is the million, billion, trillion-dollar question. And we've talked about it before, but just to regroup, the cost of a tariff is passed on to the American consumer. So if they don't source locally made goods, they'll be paying more for it.
Well, they're disincentivised to buy anything that's imported.
Exactly, except the issue is that quite often there won't be enough supply of American-made goods, or there won't be any supply at all. So it could put a brake on demand as the US economy slows. It could even go backwards, the economy. So these tariffs are a bit of a long-term bet that American producers will step in, but for many products it won't happen overnight.
Trump himself acknowledged that there could be a gap in this sort of correcting itself, and it will take a while for America to start producing the things that it's put tariffs on.
Yeah.
So he said that. What kicked the share market into trouble this week was exactly that. On Sunday in an interview, he said it will take a little time before Americans will see a payoff from his policies. Markets around the world were hit.
Yep. So our ASX 200, Kate, that's the version of the top 200 listed companies in Australia on the Australian Stock Exchange. They're put together in an index. It's our benchmark essentially of how our share market is performing. It's down more than 4% as we record for the week. That's a very big drop. So let's just see where it all lands as we get to the end of the week and the markets close on Friday afternoon.
If you have shares, you'll probably be across this, but for those who don't, that's what happened. Perhaps something more relatable, though, has been news this week that our power bills are going to go up. Claire, I think we had to include this. It's an increasingly engaged with news story, it seems, when you look across all the news sites.
Yep, 'cause he lives, that's for sure. Very quickly, if you've seen the headlines, what it's about is an announcement by the Australian Energy Regulator. They're going to lift caps on how much retailers can charge for electricity for a very big part of Australia, the biggest markets when you're particularly looking at the East Coast. Given the government has promised to bring electricity prices down by $275 a year, I think was the promise at the last election, it's not only a very very real problem for plenty of people who are struggling to pay their bills, the prospect of prices going up. But politically for the government, it's a problem too.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why they're going up, the regulator says higher costs in the grid in the past year due to breakdowns at coal-fired powered plants, elevated fossil fuel prices, rising infrastructure cost, and stretches of low wind are the main contributors to the need to charge more. Before we finish this part of the podcast, Richard Scolyer, really tough week.
Yes. So I was home watching 9 News, a current affair came on, and I stuck with it because it was the headlining interview that Ali Langdon was doing. He said he doesn't have long to live, about 3 months or so. And I texted you because, of course, we met him and you interviewed him.
Yeah, he's a remarkable person. For those who missed this whole story, Richard Scolyer is a former Australian of the Year. He's been recognised globally for his work treating melanoma with immunotherapy. Less than a decade ago, advanced melanoma was fatal, but thanks in part to his work, it's become a curable disease. Sadly, though, he himself was diagnosed with another cancer in 2023, brain cancer, glioblastoma, a disease that's fatal. So what he decided to do along with his colleagues was try and treat it using immunotherapy, so the treatment they were using for melanoma.
Very experimental.
Very experimental. He was absolutely a guinea pig for it, and it seemed to be working until recently when they discovered that the brain cancer had returned and not all of it could be removed. Given the survival rate for this type of cancer is typically less than a year, there's a lot of hope that the treatment he tried could be the start of finding a cure.
Yeah, he's got to the sort of 2-year mark, which really is quite a remarkable legacy for him to leave as well. And as he said in that interview, he and his colleagues continued to be very proud of the work they did in melanoma.
Yeah.
It's just extraordinary. But the frontier that they've opened up on those brain cancers is really, really important. Devastating for him, his family, so many who have been following his incredible journey.
Yeah, and if you do want to listen to that interview and understand who he is, I mean, he explains it a lot better than me. But more importantly, the person he is, I highly recommend it. So you can scroll through this feed to do that, or a link is in your show notes. A message now from HubSpot. When all your marketing team does is put out fires, you burn out fast. But with Breeze, HubSpot's suite of AI tools, you can get results without the stress. It means you can capture audience attention, access all your data from one place, and see how easy it is to get 110% more leads in just 12 months. Visit HubSpot.com/marketers to learn more. What's coming up? Gout, Claire. He's our fastest man. He's running again on the weekend, today, in fact. Give us how fast does he have to go? What's everyone looking out for? Where's he running?
He's 17 years old. He's competing at the Queensland Athletics Championships. The hope is that he will break that very, very magical 10-second barrier for the 100 metres and go sub 20 seconds for the 200 metres as well. There's only one Australian who's ever run under 10 seconds for the 100. That's Patrick Johnson. He did that, I think it was the 90s or early 2000s. I remember when that happened. No Aussie has run under 20 seconds for the 200, so no pressure on him at all.
That will get a lot of attention. Sunday Arvo, it's the Australian Grand Prix. I'm also already seeing so much coming through on that.
Yeah.
Obviously that's in Albert Park in Melbourne. You're a lot more engaged with the Grand Prix than me. Who are we going for?
Oscar Piastri, who's the Aussie kid from Melbourne who's driving for McLaren. He's a bit of a superstar. Like, he's going to be a thing. So, and he's relatively early in his F1 journey. So dive in and have a look at him. Also, Jack Doohan. So he's an Aussie. He's driving for Alpine. It's his first sort of contracted season. He's got to pull up his socks. He's got something to prove.
He's got a famous name.
Yeah. So he's the son of Mick Doohan. So
I just remember that Mick Doohan so clearly from my childhood. He was such a big deal.
He was the world champion motorcycle racer.
From the 90s. There you go. Monday is St. Patrick's Day. St. Pax is the guy that brought Christianity to Ireland in the 5th century.
And he drove the snakes away.
And he drank Guinness?
I don't think they had Guinness in the 5th century.
I don't know. All I know is that my daughter has to wear green to daycare.
Oh,
so they even get amongst it at daycare.
Oh, wow. With the Guinness.
I know with the Guinness. I think so.
You're in for an afternoon.
Wednesday, it's the start of the National Press Club debates.
So Michelle O'Neill from Labor and Andrew McKellar from the Coalition, they're debating industrial relations policy. We're not in an election campaign. There was some thought that we might be by now, but we're not. But you do know one's not far away when you see those sorts of events start to populate the calendar.
I assume they thought we probably would be.
Yeah.
But then, of course, we had that announcement by Albanese saying, I'm not calling it while this cyclone's happening
Yeah.
last weekend. On Wednesday, former nurse Sarah Abu Lebda is due to appear over charges relating to those anti-Semitic comments she made in video footage recorded by that Israeli social media influencer. So that will probably make quite a bit of news. On Thursday, Beau Lamar Condon, who is the former police officer accused of murdering Jesse Baird and Luke Davies, is due back in court in Sydney.
Yep, a couple of court dates to note there. On Thursday night, the Socceroos are playing Indonesia in a World Cup qualifier in Sydney. They really need to win that.
Why does that? For qualifying for the
World Cup, which is next year.
They have to win.
They're sort of lost too many games. They need all of the points out of this one with Indonesia, and they're playing China, I think, on the 25th of March, and they really, really need to win that one too.
There you go. Go you with your football knowledge. Friday's Harmony Day. That's the day to recognise and celebrate Australia's many, many cultures. Squiz recommends, Claire, you had to report back on your potatoes first of all. Don't let me forget.
I did. The masala potatoes from Broadsheet Cooking from the newsletter. Love them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lucky.
Thumbs up.
That's great.
I could go right down a rabbit hole talking to you about the virtues of boiling your potatoes and how much you boil them before you bake them. This one you absolutely, you cook them for half an hour and then you put them in the oven.
Yum.
Quite often you parboil them, which is just boiling them a little bit.
It's a bit risky to recommend something you hadn't eaten. You don't tend to do that.
Oh, no, it had all the elements. It was a good one.
Okay,
yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, easy, really easy and delicious.
Have you got another recommendation this week or are you just going to lean on?
No, I do. So police in the Philippines this week, we didn't talk about it up above, but I wanted to get it in here somewhere. They detained the former President Rodrigo Duterte on an International Criminal Court warrant that was issued for crimes against humanity during his so-called war on drugs. 27,000 people died in that, they estimate. He's now in court, in custody in the Netherlands. It's very, very controversial because the Philippines isn't a signatory to the ICC. They were when these things happened, but they're not anymore. And also his daughter is the vice president of the Philippines. So big deal there. I found it absolutely fascinating. One of these things that I remember really clearly is from 2016, a photo gallery that the New York Times did, really spotlighting those extrajudicial killings. It's pretty gruesome. It's really interesting. It tells the story of what was happening there. It's a really good look at it if you want to see what it's all about.
So the recommendation is?
Yes.
The gallery?
Yes.
And the story?
No.
Oh, well, I feel
the story's in the gallery.
Yeah, so you need, okay. Right. Claire's very serious about this.
Yeah.
Usually when we get to recommendations, she's got
something light and bubbly.
Yeah, no, I can't tell you how serious her face is right now.
It's just fascinating. And
she's really into this story.
Duterte, there's a lot of sort of eye rolling happening amongst his critics in the Philippines that a guy who engaged in extrajudicial killings is now asking for due process.
I am sort of following.
Yeah.
There is a shortcut out on this too.
Yeah,
this
on
week,
the ICC.
if you really need.
Yeah.
But that link is in your show notes. My recommendation is a little bit different.
It is a bit different.
Lots of news around you might see about the release of Snow White. So it's the remake of the original Snow White Disney movie. Lots of controversy about how they've cast it, what's in it, who the dwarves are, there's lots of already controversy about it. So you might see that.
Whether you can employ dwarves for that sort of role.
Whether they should, whether they shouldn't. It's just reams and reams of stuff you can read if you're interested. It's out next week, so this will probably continue to be a news story. But I just wanted to put a read in on Rachel Zegler, who is Snow White in the movie. She is an amazing talent. I don't know how I hadn't come across her before. Her voice is incredible. She was plucked from obscurity by Steven Spielberg and cast in West Side Story. She's got like acclaim. Her voice is incredible. There's a read on her approach to the backlash that Snow White will receive. Thought people might be interested, or else just go and give her a follow on TikTok or Instagram because she's incredible.
I completely missed this whole Snow White thing until you called it out, and now I can only see it. Yeah. It's everywhere.
It's that kind of thing. Anyway, so
Good
there
to
you go.
About.
Very serious recommendations today. I think we might leave it there. Thanks for listening to this week's Weekly Wrap. We'll be back next week.